What's up, everybody, and welcome in to another edition of The Sit Down, a crime history podcast. I'm your host, Jeff Nadu, and as always, we are presented by Barstool Sports. If you're watching this video currently on YouTube, make sure you hit that like button and let me know what you think of the content in the comment section below. If you're new around here or you just haven't done it yet, make sure you hit that subscribe button. If you're checking us out on iTunes, welcome in, Spotify, wherever you are. Make sure you leave us a detailed review. Let us know what you think of the show today, ladies and gentlemen. We're going to get into another very interesting piece of crime content, and it's back to the very interesting world of Mexican drug cartels. And if you followed the news recently, you've heard about some of the recent goings on in the state of Sinaloa. The arrest of the son of El Chapo Guzman, Ovidio Guzman Lopez, has been detailed and discussed heavily, not only in Mexican news, worldwide, even here in the United States. We know the border is a major problem in this country. And I've talked about very openly. We talked about it with Yohan Grillo a couple of weeks ago, the dangers and the fact that to this day, to this hour, cartels are in this country. They're actively producing and selling narcotics to street gangs. They're making their way throughout the United States. And eventually we wonder, will it ever come to our doorstep, literally? Today, we're going to talk to a very interesting individual. In fact, I think one of the top journalists in the country. Mexico is a deadly place for journalists. And this person that we're going to speak to today really keeps us updated on what's going on. He recently even embedded himself with the Sinaloa Cartel. It's the great Luis Chaparro, and he joins us on the sit down. Luis, I think you have one of the most interesting YouTube channels out there. I made sure in the description of this video, I included it. I urge anyone that has an interest in this subject to go check it out. The thing about the cartel content that I find so interesting, Luis, is that most of the people that I talk about are historical, right? Whether it's John Gotti or Al Capone or Pablo Escobar. But this is happening in real time, right? This is happening right now as we speak. First of all, I want to welcome you in. Thank you for coming on the show.
Thanks, man. It's a real honor to be here on your show. You're doing a terrific work on all the mafia related stories, man.
Appreciate that. And I think one thing I learned about all these different crime groups and organizations is they all are somewhat pretty similar, really. I mean, they have an organizational group at the top, but a lot of this is going to be about the Sinaloa cartel, which has become kind of something that people know about even more casually, right? I talked about this with Yohan Grillo. The likelihood of someone like El Chapo, is he one of the most recognizable criminal people in the history of America, even though he wasn't American? And when you think about like the John Gottis and the Al Capones and people like that, El Chapo was extremely recognizable. But the interesting thing we'll talk about is the Sinaloa cartel. He actually didn't really lead, right? In fact, no one really's led it. It's a little different from, let's say, the Gulf Cartel or the CJNG, where there's a leader. Before we get into that, I want to ask you, because I don't know that I've ever seen anyone ask you this. Tell me about your life, like growing up. This is the first time speaking to you. You're obviously someone that, you're a Mexican American. You live in America now, but you grew up in Mexico. Tell me about your childhood. How did you get into this line of work? And I guess ultimately, what does your family think of all this?
Sure, man. Well, I was born and raised in Ciudad Juarez, Mexico, right at the border with El Paso, Texas. And I grew up on a middle upper class family in Ciudad Juarez. My dad is an attorney. My mom is a doctor, so I have no one on my background to like that was actually a journalist, so who pursued any journalism career or whatever. I think my first approach to journalism was when I was in high school, and I read this magazine called Proceso, which is one of the top magazines in Mexico on investigative journalism. And I completely fell in love with it, and I started, like kept reading, started like writing stories. I then went to college to following a journalism degree, which I ended up obtaining. But right since the beginning, I thought, I mean, my view with journalism has always been that journalism is made out in the streets and not really at a desk or at a school. So I just basically needed the paper. And back then, of course, I didn't know anything about journalism, how to write, how to start a story, how to follow up a story, sources, whatever. but I knew that I wanted to tell something because I grew up in the 90s in Ciudad Juarez when El Señor de los Cielos, the Lord of the Skies, Amado Carrillo Fuentes, founder of the Juarez Cartel, he was huge in the city. My sister and I went to a private school in Mexico, in Ciudad Juarez, and both of Amado Carrillo's sons were classmates. The youngest was with my sister. The older was with me in elementary school. So we crossed paths, and I kept hearing stories since I was a child how these drug trafficker was seen as successful and as a major, player in business, and he had like two or three different wives at that school. And sometimes he will show up and will knock the door on my class and ask for Andresito, which was his son that was in my class. And he was, with two armed men on his back, and it was crazy because it was like so normal. But then I kept growing up with those stories, and then in 2008, by the end of 2008, there was a war in the streets of my city. It was called the most dangerous city in the world. Um, because we started seeing over 13 murders a day, which was crazy high for Mexico back then. I guess for all the world, other than Middle East and places that was at war that
Absolutely.
were at war at the moment. So I was like, what happened? Then drug traffickers began to be seen as bad persons, as killers, as assassins. And I was like, dude, I grew up with those guys being looked up for, and now they're like the bad people. And my family had a lot of friendship with businessmen, like basically the guys who own the whole city of Ciudad Juarez, and they began to be scared of them. But I was like, they were your friends. I remember you hanging out with those guys, and then all of a sudden, no one wants to talk to those guys. What happened? And then that's when I started college in 2007. I was already in college, and then I went to the local newspaper called El Diario de Juarez, and I applied for a delivery boy. I applied for a job as delivering papers. I thought that I was going to be the first one to read the news, which was a big perk for me. I didn't really need the money, so whatever what they paid me, but I wanted to be around journalists. So I was like, so maybe I get there super early in the morning and I get to hang around with those guys and work my way in. Then the editor made a mistake, and he thought I was applying for a copy editor position, which I never denied. So he asked me like, "So you're here for the copy editor, right?" And I'm like, "Yes." I had no clue what a copy editor was, and I literally had to learn in 2 or 3 hours how to do the job of a copy editor. He realized that he messed up like 8 months later. I was already hired and everything, and he was like, "Dude, you already know how to do the job. You got this job by basically lying because of my mistake, but do you want to keep the job?" And I was like, "Yes, of course." And I started basically doing style correction and all that stuff that the copy editor does for other local journalists, while still trying to figure out what was happening in my city. So I literally learned the bad way. I learned by applying to a position that was not open. I learned by questioning my parents, friends in the real world. I went to college, but I seldom learned anything, man. To be honest, it didn't really.
Well, I think in essence, I mean, I even look at the way I created what I have. I mean, a lot of it's pretty ridiculous, right? You either lie to get somewhere, or you're self-taught in a way, and you just do what you got to do. And once you get in the door, it's your
Yeah.
job to take it to the next level. And looking back, no one ever cares because it's really just about what's going on today. And you took it, you ran with it. I think it's interesting because you mentioned kind of how when you were younger, right? Because I figure we're probably close to the same age, early 30s, mid 30s. Um, when you were a kid, let's say in elementary school, we didn't really necessarily see the taking cartels into the paramilitary group until like the end of the 90s. So they
Yeah.
became these kind of like military style people that were
Yeah.
kind of attacking the government and the military. Back then, when you were a kid, I'm sure it was, more kind of the cowboy hats and the
Yeah,
the businessmen kind of people, and they had the desperado look to them.
yeah,
But and then we would start to get into, as you're in high school, probably you would see the execution tapes and
yeah,
some of the more kind of stylistic theatrical things. So
yeah.
you're right; it kind of takes it to this another level, and then they go from being kind of welcome to being the enemy, right?
Yes, exactly. And that's, I mean, again, like I literally learned everything the bad way, I mean, I remember when I started writing, I went like working my way up in the newspaper or whatever, and then I was made correspondent for a international news agency. It's called EFE, which is basically Associated Press, but in Europe, for Spain.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and I was, like writing about like all the murders happening in my city until one night, my editor called me. He woke me up, and he told me that there was 5 kids killed in one of the major, club strips in Ciudad Juarez. I went out. It was already like 3 in the morning. I had a motorcycle, and I went out to see what happened. And then I met the photographer who was working with me, and he was already there. He took some photos, and I asked him to show me the photos. And it was all of my friends. My five friends were killed on that same night in that same place. I was supposed to be there, but I was working so much and still going to college that I didn't really have the time to go out. I was, like falling asleep on my day classes and all that stuff. So I was like, I just fell asleep at my place, at my house, and I was still living with my parents. And seeing all of my friends there murder, like sparked this question in my head, like what happened, like who was responsible for this and why. Up until this day, I have no clue why they were killed in that bar, including their girlfriends and everybody. But I literally was left with no friends. I mean, I had to start over, making new friends, and having that thing on the back of my mind. And I think that pushed me forward to start writing more about drug cartels, drug organizations, to get near and more closer to sources, that knew about what was happening in the city, until I, again, like probably 2 or 3 years after that, one source who was collaborating with the DEA, but he was also a trafficker in Juarez, starting, basically sharing information with me about this woman working with the police department in Juarez, but she was sleeping with everyone. She was sleeping with narcos, she was sleeping with federal police, military police officers, and she was trafficking information all around for money. So I started publishing stories about her, until one night I was kidnapped by the local police, and they put a gun in the back of my head. They took me to this empty, like land. And then they started fighting. Two of the commanders started fighting between each other, and I managed to flee when they started fighting. And fortunately, I have the dual citizenship, so I left Juarez for probably 9, 10 months.
I mean, have you ever gotten to a point like that point, right, where you're thinking like, because I've always been fascinated by like people that do what you do, right? Because like I push around the edges and talk about some of this stuff, but you're actually in these countries, right? You talk about these people that are reported in Haiti and Syria and places like that. I mean, do you ever think to yourself like, there's got to be an easier way to it than this, right? Have you ever thought about maybe just saying, you know what, this is just too much? That seems like something where you're kidnapped. I've
Yeah,
been contacted by gangsters.
yeah,
I don't want you to write about this, stuff like that. But I don't really pay no mind to it, because the mafia is a way different thing than it used to be. But you look at what you're doing. I mean, have you ever gotten to that point where it's like, maybe is this all worth it? Am I, you know,
yeah, man. No, no, I totally get it. Like, of course, that time I had the opposite reaction. I had this very immature, young reaction where I was like, "Fuck, no, I'm not gonna be, like intimidated by these
pushed
guys.
around? Yeah.
That means that I'm doing the right thing and whatever." And then my bosses at the news agency and at the local paper, because I was doing both things at the same time, they removed me from every source writing about drug trafficking, violence, and all that stuff. And I had to write, stuff like sports and, like social gatherings, all kind of stuff, which was
Not your
really
thing.
boring.
Yeah.
They We filed an official complaint with the human rights organization and all that stuff. And And then they wanted me to do like a huge campaign, bringing awareness about like the work of a journalist. And I wanted to stay silent. So I was like too afraid by then. And then after that, I remember like 9 months later, like these was probably the darkest times ever I've ever had, because I was deprived from going to my city, deprived
Hmm.
from doing what I love, with a bunch of like emotions about like like suffering different emotions,
Yeah.
anger and sadness, and then remembering my friends that were killed, and
Yeah.
a lot of anxiety and all that stuff. So I remember every night I was living in an apartment where you can see Juarez from El Paso. So I will see all the flashing lights from different police officers and all that stuff, police cars. And I was like, every night I used to cry a lot, like I was just watching the city and crying until I fell asleep, and then over again, and then over again. Many, like for 9 months. It was like really dark times I went through those days. Um, and then afterwards, I received a call from one of my sources who used to work with the Juarez Cartel, with La Linea, which was the armed branch for the Juarez Cartel. And he asked me like, what happened? And I was like, what are you talking about? Because I never told anyone. And he was like, no, I learned that something happened to you with the local police, with the peaks, he told me. And I was like, I don't think so, man. No, I mean, I just moved to El Paso because it's easier for me. The newspaper opened new offices in El Paso, so I'm working out of El Paso now. And he's like, nah, don't bullshit me, man. I mean, I'm always being, like a good source to you, very transparent, very honest. To let me what happened, and I kept denying anything happened. I was like, I don't know what you're talking about, man. Like, let's talk later. And then he asked me to turn on the news at nine in the night. I turned on the news, and the two police cars that kidnapped me were completely riddled with bullets. Four officers killed right there. I'm pretty sure that they were the same guys who got me, who kidnapped me. And I remember back then we used to talk through these walkies called Nextel.
Yeah.
They were very
I, I
popular back
I
then.
had a few of them. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So I pinged him, and I was like, dude, what the shit? Like, what did you just do? And he was like, I didn't do anything, man. They had it coming. I told you, those guys were pigs. They had it coming. And when I learned what happened to you, I thought like this might be as good time as any other to get rid of them.
So they kind of, you know, killed two birds with one stone, if you will,
Yeah,
where you kind of had an issue with them, but they kind of had an issue, but this was a good reason to do it. Wow,
exactly.
that's incredible.
And it
So
was,
you're kind of at a point in your life where you lose your friends, you miss your job, in a weird way. You have this, and I don't want to say anything that's not true, but you had an addiction to what you were doing. You really enjoyed it, you loved it, it was your calling, and I think that's something that, you know, when you have a calling, you don't care about some of the things that could happen. Did you though understand the value of when that stuff kind of happened? Did you really understand that to do your job at the right level, you have to have the good sources, but B, and I want you to kind of explain because I've noticed in some of the comments of some of your videos, occasionally you'll find people that belittle you and say
yeah.
you work for this person, you work for that person, you're a mouthpiece for this group. Um, Kind of explain the workings of what you have to do there to survive in a way.
Yeah. So I get accused, like from every single side of the spectrum. I get accused by criminals that I work for these or that agency or police station or the DEA or the FBI or the Mexican government. Then I get accused from the Mexican government sources to work with a criminal group, the Sinaloa Cartel, with the Cartel Jalisco Cartel, with the Zetas back then. I get accused of all from like also like I get accused from U.S. readers that I'm, like trying to go against the US because I'm Mexican or whatever. And then I get accused from the Mexicans.
You
Why
can't
don't you
win,
only speak
right?
English or bashing your country? So I get heat from all over. And you have to grow with a thick skin and with a lot of certainty of what you're saying. And also the certainty, I think this is the most important part of this stuff. The certainty that you're going to make mistakes all the time. As you were saying at the beginning, sometimes talking about criminal groups that happened 10 years before, 20 years before, you sort of like get more details about what really happened, or at least an official version of what happened, and an unofficial version of what happened. And then you kind of like go in between when you're writing about stuff happening at the moment. um, people getting captured, people getting killed, new criminal organizations, new top bosses, all that stuff. You get a lot of things wrong, and that's okay, because what we want to do is to bring what is happening right at the time that is happening, and then revisiting what happened a couple of months, days, years later, and go back and see, like, okay, what happened back then, like what this is what really happened. But I made pieces with, like, knowing that I'm gonna make mistakes all the time, because I'm in the places where things are happening as I go, like with the capture of a video. That very morning, my phone started. I have three different border phones other than my personal phone, where most of my sources in different places call me. I usually wake up like 5:30 in the morning, start reading news and all that stuff. But I overslept that. I think it was a Thursday or a Saturday. I can't remember. I overslept that day, and my one of my phone was going super crazy, and it was like many sources telling me that something was happening in Sinaloa. That apparently El Chapo's son has been captured, and I disregarded everything because I was like, dude, I don't think so. Like, to be honest, it's just maybe another sicario that was. So it's a lot of chisme, a lot of like talking. Disregarded the whole messages until I saw one message, one Twitter message that told me that the town where the operation was happening was Jesus Maria. And I knew from beforehand that Ovidio Guzman was living in Jesus Maria. So I was like, okay, this is very detailed, because there's nothing going on in Jesus Maria but a video. So I woke up, started calling, and got a bunch of stuff not right, because at the beginning they told me that Ovidio was still fighting inside the house, that one of his daughters was injured, that he was already out of the airport, and then the DA was in the house. So a lot of like crazy stuff. I had to write a story, so I wrote with like whatever sources I could get more solid, and then I revisited the story. And then a week later, I traveled to that place to enter Ovidio's house and try to figure out what really happened.
What I want to kind of talk about kind of the overall state of Sinaloa and how in Culiacan, how that Chapitos essentially, have the entire public behind them, and I've talked about this in several different interviews and stuff that I've done about how, in a way, it's like even in America with the mafia, for instance, most areas that are controlled by the mafia are more entwined with dealing with the mafia themselves over the police. They don't trust the police. They don't trust the government. And in Mexico, I mean, as you will explain, the government is entirely corrupt and they don't buy into the government. So people in Jesus Maria and Culiacan, they all kind of side with the cartels. But what gave you the idea? Because that's some really rare access, right? You decide, hey, this is a house that it was a crime scene. Now it's not necessarily a crime scene, but it's vacant. I'm going to just go to it. Talk through how that happened. Did you have to get any approval? Did you just go?
Yeah.
What gives you that idea? Because I saw your video when you did that, and I guess you don't think about it. It's fascinating that you decided to do that.
Yes, man. I mean, at the beginning, I wasn't thinking of going inside Ovidio's house at all. I wanted to go to Jesus Maria to ask, neighbors and people how whether what happened that night, how they're living with Ovidio on a side, if he was actually there, if the Mexican government killed innocent people, if the sicarios killed or took innocent kids, like what really happened. Didn't have really much time to think about it because I was literally asked to be deployed uh, one morning, and I had to leave like that same afternoon. My editor asked me, do you think it's a good idea to actually go to Jesus Maria? And I was like, yeah, but if I go, it will need to happen like now, like today, because we're already a week late, and I don't know what's gonna happen later. If they're gonna, I was already thinking that those guys were gonna take back the town after the military left or whatever. So I was like, that's gonna be a more dangerous place to be there. So I want to go while the Mexican military is still there, where we can still meet other press member, either local press or international press, whatever. So I literally bought like 5 or 6 different flights for if I missed one, I will leave the next morning and all that stuff. 5 different nights in different places. So I maxed my, my credit card buying flights and nights everywhere, every single, 2 hours of that kind of stuff. And then I had to go through a very tight and very tense meeting with legal department and security department. Like, what are you gonna do there? At the end, all of them decided that I couldn't be there more than 7 hours in the ground, because I had already received threats by the Sinaloa Cartel after entering the whole weed operation of Los Chapitos. I got permission to enter to the weed industry, because they're pushing now the weed industry to a national market in Mexico, and they're grabbing a bunch of different ideas from California.
So you had essentially at this point, you had kind of a tedious relationship with them, because previously you had, and I had heard you mention this, and I'll explain, like Chapitos has went into the legal weed business in a way, right?
Yeah.
Where they're trying to market that because they know in America that's a booming business.
Yeah.
So you had talked about, you went to these locations and you were kind of writing stories and they weren't happy. Let me ask you, what kind of things do they say to you? Like, do they just contact you and say, hey, what do they say to you?
So basically, at the beginning, I had a lot of sources in Sinaloa, in different places. Sinaloa, with the Cartel Jalisco, I have a bunch of sources too. U.S., like 3 letters agencies. Like I'm grabbing sources from all over, but many of those sources are disposable, right? Like they either get killed, arrested, they just disappeared, or things like these happen. So this time I went and I asked one of the local guys that I know, that he's very close to Los Chapitos. He was actually very close to Ovidio. I had gone many other times to, fentanyl labs, meth labs, to interview sicarios, to training camps of sicarios and all that stuff in Sinaloa. So this time around, I just wanted to do something about weed. So that was like it seemed that it was going to be easier, right? Because it was just weed, and they wanted also to, to be very honest and transparent about the weed industry. But then I think that guy didn't really disclose to the higher tops what I was doing there, because he told me that it was super easy. That was an easy, task and whatever. I never hand out any money to these guys. I usually just push and push and push. And after working many other times with them, I usually it's just gonna be me and my cell phone, and nothing huge. It's not gonna be a huge production, because when you travel with massive production, they usually ask for money, right? If you're traveling with 2 or 3 different cameramen, a sound guy, whatever, so it complicates everything more. So my reporting is usually me on my own with with a notepad, old style. Sometimes voice recording, or my cell phone to grab like photos and videos and all that stuff. So this time around, I went only with my camera, with my phone camera, and another friend of mine also with a phone camera. Everything was cool. Actually, the documentary came out really well. The reporting was amazing. It was fun. It was intense. It was very exclusive access to the whole operation inside the weed industry. Brands, edibles, greenhouses, huge, fields of weed.
And this was a legit business. So you assumed, oh, this is going to be fine. They probably want me to do this. But in turn, it was probably not what they wanted, because they were trying to probably monopolize it, right? And be the only ones doing it.
Exactly. They got pissed because after reporting everything and all, I published one story talking about how the Los Chapitos wanted to create a new industry. They were grabbing, ideas from California and everything. But then another guys from a national Mexican news outlet went in, didn't really ask for permission. They used a local fixer. They went inside one of these dispensaries, grabbed photos, and published a story right after mine, before my documentary came out. So that brought him a lot of heat, because they got the bosses high on top got confused, and they thought that was me, because I never revealed any brand, any names, any locations. So I was like, this is not used. I mean, I guess the story can sustain itself even if I don't say where exactly the dispensaries are located, But these guys publish, like the streets where the dispensaries were located, like the front facades of the dispensaries, the names of several of them involved in the business. So they thought that was me. And then they called me and said, like, dude, you fucked up. Like, you shouldn't never publish that story, take it down, whatever. And I thought they were talking about my story. And I was like, dude, I'm not taking anything down. That was my reporting. I went to do that. I told you, I'm not doing PR. I'm doing journalism.
So they used you as like a scapegoat for this person's behavior. So they kind of blamed you for everything. And that's kind of, that's essentially why.
At the beginning, we got like so confused because I thought they were talking about my story, and they thought that other story was me. So after they got all together, like some of the top narcos working for Los Chapitos, they called me on a conference call. And to be honest, I was pretty scared about that because we're talking about like powerful people. And I was like, I remember I was so jumpy that my reaction was probably not the best. And I told them, like, guys, you need to stop using so much fucking cocaine. You're all jumped on your head. This is not happening outside of your small world in Culiacan. Think bigger. I didn't even reveal anything, guys. You're just using too much coke and getting together. So stop getting together, go do your things, and stop using so much coke, and then we'll talk.
You said that to them.
And they were like so surprised. They were like, yeah, viejon. Yeah, well, I mean, yeah, probably you're right, but
do you think they respect the things you say to them? Because that's pretty ballsy. I mean, you essentially tell people that do very depraved things, hey, you're using too many drugs, bro. Get your head right.
Dude,
that's ballsy.
I always try to do the right thing and have my things right and have transparency. And so when it comes to this point, I'm sure of what I'm saying. And if I fucked up, then I will say, guys, I'm sorry. It was my honest mistake. I didn't want to jeopardize anyone. There was a confusion, whatever. But then in that meeting, we figured it out that was not my story. So I was like, no, wait. I never published that photo, man. And they're like, so you're not, I'm not, that was not me. They're like, so who the hell was that? And I'm like, I don't know. And then they hung up the phone, and I guess they went after the local fixer guy that did that or made that access. They left me alone for a time, and then I was about to publish my documentary. They called me again and said, like, no, you can't publish anything now from this point. And I'm like, dude, you're not my editor. You're not paying me for this stuff. Like, I'm a journalist. I went in the right way, did the right thing. Someone else messed up. I'm not gonna let these affect my reporting, my story, all the work I put into this. Because I'm doing the right thing. Mm-hmm. And they're like, dude, you're going to jeopardize a lot of people here, whatever. And I'm like, I'm not jeopardizing anything, man. Did I ask you to be a drug trafficker? Did I put a gun to your head and ask you like to get into this business? No, right? I'm taking my risk as a journalist. You take yours as a drug trafficker. This is what happens. This is what you're going to face either with me, with the DA, with another journalist, with whoever, man. Like, this is the life you chose. This is the life I chose, right?
You're just trying to be fair to them. Like, in the end, like, most people aren't going to be fair. They're just going to publish it. They don't ask for any approval or anything. You're actually trying to go through the right channels and be fair and be stern. It really seems like you've mastered how to speak to these people. And I think that's why maybe in the end, they kind of respect you and have the willingness to give you stories. So you're telling, in a way, once the Ovidio stuff happened, there was still a little bit of blowback and they were a little skeptical to let you around there, but they ultimately do.
Because at the end, they asked me not to go back to Culiacan. They asked me like, dude, you know what? You're not welcome here anymore. You're being very disrespectful. We're asking you not to do one thing and you're doing your way. And then one of them told me something that hit me really deep, but that was probably true. He told me that you're more of a journalist than anything else. I get it. So that's the last thing he said before hanging up. He's like, so eres más periodista que otra cosa. You're more journalist than anything else. And I get it. And boom, he hung up the phone. And I was like, kind of like pissed about that because I was like, what the hell did you try to say to me? Like that I'm not human, that I'm not, whatever, that I'm more of a journalist than a human being, or I don't get it. But then like that stuff kept, circling my mind. And I was like, wow, probably I'm portraying that I'm more of a journalist than I actually respect my own life or whatever. But then I was like, that was the last communication we had. So I couldn't really know if I was safe going back to Culiacan. I couldn't really talk to my sources inside that world. I have other sources, who I called beforehand, and I was like, dude, hey man, of course you know why I'm calling you, right? And he's like, yeah, they captured El Raton. I'm guessing you want to do something around that. I'm not sure I can help you, but what's up? And I was like, I want to travel there, but beforehand I need to tell you something happened with these guys. Like I had this beef and all that stuff. And he's like, oof, dude, you're in deep shit. You know, like I don't think I can help you this time. Let me ask around because he's family of one of the top head security guys for high up people in Sinaloa, and see what can we do. He called his family friend or family member, and then he got back to me and he's like, dude, they told me literally this: if he wants to come, let him come. I can't promise anything. So I was like, oof, that didn't really sound too convincing, you know. So then that was happening the morning that I had already bought my flights and everything. So I was like, damn. So yes, I mean, I'm going, and let's see what happens. And
So you had no doubt, like maybe I shouldn't do this, because you had always had a pretty good relationship up until then. I mean,
Mhm.
you're venturing into, possibly one of the worst places on the earth, really. I
Yeah.
mean, did you ever think about, hey, maybe I shouldn't do this? Maybe this should be
Yes,
the one I don't
yes,
go to.
definitely. And I thought to myself, like, you know what? I guess I'll do it, and I'll go as I feel. If I land in Culiacan and then all of a sudden while I'm there I don't feel safe, I'll just grab a next flight, buy a next flight 2 hours from there and leave, or stay at a hotel, or rent a car and then leave, drive. Like, let's see, let's go as I go. And I
Mhm.
usually, when I not sure about something, I usually go as I go. And so I literally landed that morning. I landed the next morning because I had to overlay in Mexico City. Um, and I landed the next morning, like 6 in the morning. And I called because I know that many of my sources have a bunch of eyes at the airport. So I knew that they were gonna know that I was there, even though I was wearing a face mask. And I cut my hair because I used to have longer hair. I was wearing glasses and a hat, and I was like, they're gonna know, man. I better just do the right thing. And if like something happens, well, something happens. I'm already here. So I sat at a local coffee inside the airport and messaged my contact there, the other guy that I was talking to earlier. And I was like, hey, brother, guess what? And he's like, what's up? And I was like, I'm actually in your turf. And he's like, yeah, I know. I'm actually outside, man. I'm picking you up.
He already
And I
knew.
was like,
Wow.
what are you writing? And he's like, walk out, go to the left. And then I saw a lot of military arriving, like 3 or 4 Humvees arriving to the airport. And he's like, what's up with these guachos with the military? And I was like, I have no clue, man. Like, I guess they're taking care of it, right? Just like cracking a joke. And he's like, are you sure they're not with you? And I'm like, no, man. Like, I'm out by myself here. That's it. And he's like, all right, I'm in the green pickup truck to your right. And I was like, all right, jumped in, say hi, hey, what's up, man? And he's like, what's up? What are you doing? And I was like, I had to. And he's like, dude, you're fucking crazy. But all right, let's what do you want to do? What do you need to do? You're already here. And I then I asked him, like, just give me like 5 minutes. I need to call another man here. I called another local photographer who I've never met before, but I knew his work. And I was like, hey, compa, I'm here in Sinaloa. I just arrived here. Will you be cool to go up with me to Jesus Maria? I can pay for the day and all that stuff. And it's basically as a fixer for me. I'm with a source of mine that works for this organization. Just full disclosure, let me know. And he was like, yes, let's meet at this hotel and let's go. So I managed to have two different people from two different backgrounds with me in case something was going bad one way or the other. So I felt pretty safe then. I was like, okay, I'm riding with one of these guys, but I also have a local photographer with me. So we started going up to Jesus Maria. Um, a bunch of military checkpoints. We had to go through that very different military checkpoint. This guy who works for the Sinaloa Cartel, he carries very different batches from different news outlets, fake news outlets, of course. So every time we will be stopped at a checkpoint, I had my credentials for one of the magazines I work for. The local photographer has his badge from his newspaper, and this guy will show up with just any random credential, like I don't know, whatever media.com, and they will be like, okay, Charles, go ahead. And when we arrived to Jesus Maria, I knew that it was not going to be that easy because the last checkpoint was not a military checkpoint, was actually a sicarios checkpoint right at the arches that says "Welcome to Jesus Maria." So I was like, okay, so I'm late or too early, I don't know, because there's no military anymore here, and these guys have already taken again the control of the town. I told them that I was just gonna talk to local people to do, like photos, videos, and they were like, "All right," and they let me go. These local source knew where Ovidio's house were, so he started driving around town. And as we arrived there, the photographer told me, "Dude, I think there is like state police out there. Like we saw two guys and a woman." And then the guy driving, the guy from the Sinaloa Cartel, told me, "No, that's Ovidio's mom. That's Griselda, man." And he got nervous. And so I got even more nervous. I was like, well, "So what the shit should I do, man? Like, what is she doing here?" Because I know she's flagged as one of the also like the main targets from the U.S. So I was like, so I
It's
just
Chapo's wife.
it was Chapo's former wife, yeah, ex-wife,
Yeah.
yeah. So I jumped out of the car and had my cell phone with me on a, like on a stick, on a gimbal. And then immediately she put up her face mask and start saying like, "No, no, 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 no." And I was like, "No, I'm not recording. I'm not." And then her attorneys, like jumped off of me and they're like, "Hey man, just are you recording anything?" I'm like, "No, I'm not recording anything, man. Make sure you're not recording." I'm sure I'm not recording. "Okay, who is with you?" And I was like, "This is a local photographer. This is my local driver, and I'm Luis Chaparro. I'm working for this magazine. I'm doing this story of Jesus Maria. I saw you coming out of the house of a video, and I want to know if." And then he immediately started saying, "Dude, you can be here while we're here, right? So just leave, do whatever you want to do, whatever you need to do, but please leave immediately. These, like these este terreno, like this
Right.
land."
Mm-hmm.
So I was like, "All right, I'm leaving. Oh, cool." And he's like, "Make sure that you're not recording while we're here." And I'm like, "All right, I'll respect that." I left, started talking to local people, like to this old woman whose house was all riddled with bullets. Another woman who told me that her son got shot by the Mexican military, and he was at the hospital fighting for his life. 12 years old kid that went out for food. Another guy who had her wife in a wheelchair and he needed to take her every other day to Culiacan, to the city, to get medical attention, but his car got completely riddled with bullets, so it was useless. So people was pretty pissed at the Mexican government.
No, the older people, like the elders in
Yeah,
these towns, how do they're very pro
totally.
cartel, right?
Everybody was very pro Guzman, specifically the Guzmans. Like they told me literally this. That guy told me like that man was a hero, man. That man was a hero. If we got sick, he will get us prescriptions. He will get us medicine, money. He will help everybody in town, and he's not asking for anything in return. He was just living his peaceful life in that house, not harming anyone. He had a small gathering with his family, with his three daughters. He was not messing with anyone. I don't know why the Mexican military came here and caused trouble. So their
Do
deal
you
was like,
let me ask you something. I'm curious about this because this kind of relates to I think the overarching question.
yeah,
Okay, are as someone that lives in America, okay, I've been to Mexico once,
mhm,
Tijuana for a night. It was nothing. As someone that looks at this from here,
mhm,
I look at it and I say, okay, these are the bad people,
yeah.
Sinaloa, the different groups, right? Are they actually the good people here? Because this
Not at
business
all.
goes on regardless, doesn't it? I mean, the government sounds like the real tyrants here, aren't they? I mean, the
Yeah.
people in the streets don't like the government, but they like these people. It almost sounds like they're Robin Hood to
Yeah.
all these people. They're the real heroes, are they?
Yeah, I don't. I mean, I don't think at all that they are the good people. At the end, these are violent people. Los
Sure.
Chapitos are pretty much violent. They've killed almost every single leadership that they find around, like priests, journalists, local politicians. Like everyone. So I don't think they're at all heroes. The thing is, they have been very smart, if not trained, in getting social bases, in getting like social support, because I
Hmm.
think that's the only weapon that the Mexican military don't have. Like, the
Yeah,
Mexican military has enough firepower and enough men to
to take them out.
capture and grab and basically dismantle every single organization, for as big as it is. They have enough. Like, the Mexican military is very powerful, even though we read that they're overpowered, whatever. That is not true. Like, if you really go into what is the Mexican military, what kind of equipment they have, what kind of training they have, they're pretty much powerful. They have very elite groups trained by the world's elite groups. So they're very well trained and prepared. But the one thing they don't have is social support, and this is what cartels have, and have been earning more and more, as as I guess Mexico had a real split between cities and rural Mexico, and rural Mexico stayed behind. And we're talking that over 60% of the country, it's still rural.
Hmm.
And these guys are living in a very impoverished, environments, with lack of, basic services like access to a doctor, access to education, access to even a paved road. Um, and guess who is paving the roads? Who's building hospitals? Who's building schools?
Cartel.
It's cartel with drug money or extortion money or whatever money. They are, when the COVID hit, they were the ones enforcing COVID measures. Other than the government, they were the ones that if they caught you out in the street not using a face mask, they will beat the hell out of you, to give out a lesson to every other people to use the face mask, to get vaccinated, to do like social distancing. It's crazy because those
So,
guys.
I say this to all of the folks that watch these that didn't give a shit about vaccines. Just be happy you don't live in Sinaloa or
Yeah,
Michoacan or those places, because you don't have a fucking choice there.
yeah,
You do what you're told and you do it.
exactly.
And I've heard about this really everywhere because I've looked into other cartels. I've looked into the group CSRL, right?
Yeah,
That guy El Matto.
sí,
And he was so loved, like in some of those really small municipalities, right? Where, and we saw it in Culiacan when they've come after a video multiple times. It wasn't just the Sicarios, it was people in the streets. I saw after the arrest recently, you had women, children out in the
yeah,
streets, get out of here to the
yeah.
military. They don't want them here. That's really interesting. You say that the social support that they have and years of decay and allowing these places to go impoverished. The only winners really and the heroes were the drug trade,
Yeah.
and they were so good to them. You never really think of that. That's amazing.
Exactly. They have a huge propaganda machine, like
Yeah.
cartels in Mexico. I think they learned at the very beginning with Los Zetas, right? When the
Oh yeah.
Zetas came out, they came out as very violent, very ruthless, and people started going against them. People started like fearing Los Zetas, but not respecting them, and not, trying to get on their good side or whatever, because they were seen as murderers, like cold murderers. They will kill just because they want to kill. They
Yeah, I've
will.
heard like they were just like, a lot of them were thought of just like drug addict, like
Yes, exactly.
lunatics.
So people perceive that from them. And I guess other cartels, like the Cartel de Sinaloa, Del Golfo, and all those guys learned the lesson and said, like, you know what, we need to get people on our side. So let's behave well, that we don't use drugs. We dress as proper military members, with camo, bullet vest. We identify ourselves, and we're not dressed as civilians. So we use CJNG or CDS for Cartel de Sinaloa.
Yeah.
So they're basically playing by the rule, quote unquote, identifying themselves, trying to be on the good side of the people, helping them, doing social labor, asking locals what do they want. If they want a job, they could easily get them to work as sicarios. Of course, they were taking advantage of all these young people.
Are they in these towns like Jesus Maria and places like that? Are they because I always relate it back to the mafia. The mafia used extortion as a almost like a benevolent society, right? Like a civic society where, hey, just give us $50 a week, and we'll make sure there's no crime, and it's all a civic duty, right? It's like a political contribution in a way. Is that how they use extortion, or they just not do extortion at all because they don't want to take from their citizens?
I think Sinaloa is one of the few states where extortion is really low, if existent. And this is only because the Sinaloa Cartel has such a grasp on that town that they're not fighting really with anyone. So they don't really need more money to keep more operations going in Sinaloa. Now, the Sinaloa Cartel does use extortion in places like Chihuahua, Durango, Zacatecas, in places where they're actually fighting another faction, and they need to keep funds going to keep the war going. So they use extortion, kidnapping, all of those different, ways to fund themselves. But I guess, what they get is social support by this massive propaganda that has to do also with the narco corridos, drug ballads, like the narco cultura. Now everybody wants to sing about El Raton or about JGL, JGL, Joaquin Guzman Loera. Dude, this music is getting to the top of the charts internationally, and this is because they are actually putting a lot of money also in the music business to these music artists. I'm not generalizing, talking about everyone, but I know for a fact that they're putting money to some of them to sing songs about them, and that's propaganda. And that's the music industry is made out of money. It's not made out of popularity or out of like how good as a musician you are. It's made about how much money you have. And that same happened with the mafia, with the Italian mafia, at the very beginning in states like New York or Chicago, right? A lot of singers like Sinatra was so intertwined with these guys. And most of his money and his success had to do with the Italian mafia support. Absolutely. And that's the same thing happening in Mexico with the drug battles, with the narco corridos. And they're earning more social support by everybody singing their songs and looking up for them. And then the hats they're using now,
and social media has added fuel to the fire too, because I've seen like different people report on like some cartels are going to the point of like recruiting people through like gaming apps and like Twitch and like all these crazy things. And I think as you mentioned, I think the question I asked, like, are these people heroes in a way? I think in rural communities, like they're looked at as the only person that's ever helped me are these people. And why the hell do I want to go be this or that when I could be like these people? They've always been there for me. They're the good guys. They're the ones helping me. And this is the problem and why we have crime everywhere, because whether it's a black neighborhood or an Italian neighborhood or a Mexican neighborhood, the people that are really winning a lot of the time are criminals, right? And that's all you've ever known. It's different from me or even from you. Me and you are similar in a way, because I was never around criminals. I was never around gangsters. I think with the right ethics that I was given by my parents, I always saw the right from wrong, but so many people don't.
Exactly.
And, they see the music and they hear their favorite rappers talking about Chapo. So I saw a soccer player. I think he plays for Atlas or one of those groups down there. He was recently under an issue with the club because his kid had a Chapo themed birthday party.
Yes, exactly.
I don't know if you heard about that.
No, totally. And the same happened with the mayor of Cuernavaca, right next to Mexico City, which used to be these major soccer player, Cuauhtemoc Blanco, with the America club. And he had photos with people with the Cartel Jalisco Nueva Generación, and now they're talking about all the links he had to a certain criminal group. And they're like it's getting everywhere. It's literally penetrating every single aspect of our culture. And to no wonder, I mean, again, if you live in the US, and even if you don't trust the police, you still can sort of rely in police, right?
Absolutely. You can't rely there on them.
Exactly. Someone comes knocking your door and then try to or loot your house, or someone grabbed your son or your daughter or your wife. what are you gonna do immediately? It's call 911 and say like someone enter my house and grab my wife or grab my son, or stole my money or whatever. In Mexico, that's probably not what you're gonna do. Like probably you're gonna say like, well, what I'm gonna call the police for? It's just bureaucracy probably to have a paper that I can show that I was actually stolen from, or that my girl is missing, or my.
So you're looking at America and you're saying, like, wait a second, you actively want to get rid of the police.
Yeah.
Like, you're looking at that and saying that's crazy. Like, we have that happening here and we have nowhere to turn when something actually bad happens. Because look, whether you like the police or not, they have a job to do. And, most of them are not awful people, right? They're just trying to do a job and protect people and take bad people off the street.
Absolutely.
You're looking at it as someone that's seen it, and
Yeah.
say the police are the bad people here.
Exactly. Yes, exactly. Because I mean, at the end, you don't trust the police because they're probably been known for abusing their power. That's probably one of the worst things happening in America right now, where the police force will abuse their power, killing especially Black people, Latino community leaders, and all that stuff. That's something different than just like getting putting a target in everyone. Like every single police will just knock on your door and you will be fearful of a police officer
Right.
knocking at your door. That's what's happened in Mexico. So if you have a contact that has a contact that knows someone, and you had your kid, your girl, your car, something missing out of your house, you're gonna ask that contact, hey man, this happened. Can you help me out? Through your contacts. And then someone's gonna ask that contact. And eventually it's gonna end up in the ears of the cartel, right? Like someone is asking for a favor. A girl disappeared, a man disappeared, these guy's car got stolen, and they will find it in no second. They will find it like that. You'll get a call a couple of hours later, probably 2 days later, saying like, "Hey, we found your car, we found your missing relative, whatever," and that's it. Because I mean, in wealthy neighborhoods in Mexico, for example, they live off so well because they know, and they have many of them have links to people that is involved in one of these criminal organizations. So they know that you can steal from them, you can kidnap them, you can extort them, because they know we're pretty sure that they're gonna know someone high up, right? So that's happening in the middle class, lower class populations in Mexico. They.
What kind of things? What kind of things do they do to thieves and people like that? I know you've kind of talked about that before. Some of the methods they use. Tell me about that.
So basically, they have one thing, at least in Sinaloa, they use this one thing, which is the last time I was there, I was introduced to these mullet. It's basically, it looks like a cricket mullet. And I was introduced to that as the constitution of the Sinaloa Cartel. They're like, this is our constitution. This is what we use to make people do the right thing here. If we caught you stealing, extorting, robbing, whatever, they'll smack your ass over 100 times until your skin comes off and you can't see it for months. And they're gonna post that video online for your humiliation. So that's literally what the cartel does in that specific region in Sinaloa. They beat your ass so bad that you're basically gonna end up in the hospital.
I've seen those large like pizza paddles they've used as
Yes.
well, where they're like, but
Yeah.
some places it's more brutal, isn't it?
Yes, some of the places that will tie you to an electricity post. Some other places will cut your hand. Some other places will cut your head. There are many different messages they send for whatever you did. Like if you stole something, you're gonna end up with your hands chopped. If you spoke something that you wasn't supposed to say, like about if you're what do you call these? Yeah, like a whistleblower or something.
Yeah,
It will
a
cut your
rat.
tongue, yes, or your throat, basically kill you. So yeah, these guys don't really rely on putting you in jail, or getting you to.
Mob justice, right?
Yes, it's
They just kind of
literally.
deal with you themselves.
Yeah, Yes,
What
and
do
again,
you?
not all of them, because most of the criminal organization will tell you we don't extort, we are the good guys, and we're fighting against the other guys who are extorting you. That's propaganda. That's not real. All of them are doing extortion, kidnappings, killings, all that stuff.
When you went into the home subsequently, what kind of things did you find in Ovidio's home? You know, he comes across as you talked about, kind of just like a nondescript family man. But I think that we would learn a lot about him in a way. You know, he isn't the most powerful brother. He Tell me about kind of the family structure of Chapo Guzman, because I know that he has, I think, 9 children. I mean, some are very young, right, to that newer wife, but
Yeah,
they're actually half brothers, Ivan and the other brother, and then
yeah.
Ovidio. Kind of talk about his status and kind of what you found when you went into the home.
Totally. So El Chapo Guzman is said to have over 30 kids.
30.
Yeah,
Wow.
like 10 of them
I thought
are,
it was like 9 or 10.
yeah, like 10 of them are kind of like recognized people,
So
but
he may have,
but
tens of.
he probably has many, many more.
Mhm.
But I guess the major faction of his sons is composed of uh, sons from two different marriages, right? Ivan Archibaldo Guzman and Jesus Alfredo are from one family, and then Joaquin and Ovidio are from another family. There was another kid called Edgar who was killed in
Killed, yeah.
2008,
Yeah.
to a very, like, known in Culiacan story, that when they killed Chapo's son, he bought every single flower in the whole city of Culiacan and delivered, like dumpsters full of flowers were in the place where he was killed. And that's I don't know if that's true. I haven't seen any photos or anything, but that's a story that goes around Culiacan. Every time you bring up Edgar Guzman's name. And so, yeah, basically you have these two separate kids. The oldest are Jesus Alfredo and Ivan Archibaldo, and then the second ones are Ovidio and Joaquin. Uh, I think El Chapo wanted something very different for Ovidio specifically. He is the one who gave him the nickname of El Raton, because he looks like a mouse. He's big ears and big front tooths and very skinny. Like, so I guess he called him El Raton. He sent him to one of the most exclusive elite schools in Mexico City when he was a kid, to elementary school. And then when he broke out of prison for the first time in 2001, he knew that he was going to be a target. He knew that his son, the son he really wanted to be something different than a drug trafficker, was going to be a target, because he was already being targeted by his classmates. They had a school trip to Disneyland. And Ovidio was not invited. Ovidio was left behind because everybody started talking that he was the son of El Chapo, and that the Chapo had just recently broken out of prison, and they didn't want to have him with them because they thought they were gonna have problems when they got
Right.
across the border. Griselda Lopez, Ovidio's mom, offered to pay for everyone's trips, expenses to LA if they included Ovidio with them. And they still say no. So Ovidio can't come with us. And that forced El Chapo to bring Ovidio back to Culiacan, to got him together with his brothers, and to put them in charge of Ovidio. So he told all of the other brothers, like, guys, you need to take care of this kid. This is my youngest. I don't want him involved in anything that has to do with the cartel. I don't want him to be hurt. Just take
Do you
care of.
think? Let me ask you. Why do you think that is? Do you think it was just he recognized maybe he wasn't like his other brothers, like he didn't have it in him in a way?
I think that's very probable. Or he saw himself a lot more in Ovidio, because they're very alike, not physically, but in the way they are, the way they portray themselves. They're flashy. They want to be the center of attention. They want to be,
Interesting.
like, calling for attention and not really calling the shots, but being recognized as something big. And like with women, they are like very enticed to women. Like they love women.
Sure.
They've had very much different women around Sinaloa. So I guess he saw himself more in a video than in the other guys for some reason. But then again, Ovidio ended up, you know, working with his brothers, with Ivan Archibaldo, who was already working with the organization. Jesus Alfredo also was very, known to be flashy with guns, to be flashy with like I'm Guzman family and whatever. And Ovidio apparently wasn't really like that. He was more of a quiet kid. He loved cars, so he got himself, like a bunch of different Ferraris, Lambos, Mercedes Benz, and all those sorts of different cars. And he will go out. I remember when the first years I started going to Culiacan. If you were around the Tres Rios strip, which is a wealthy neighborhood where you have like great American restaurants and a Starbucks and everything, you will see like a Lamborghini riding across the street, and everybody will know that's Ovidio, right? Everybody's like, oh, there goes Ovidio. And I started asking like, who's Ovidio? And it's like a Chapo's, one of El Chapo's son. But he was more used to go around without security, without like an army behind him. I think he felt more like free because he wasn't really calling the shots or having anything really to do with the organization until later up when to fund himself and his lifestyle. He definitely started putting cocaine, heroin, and fentanyl to the border of Sonora, to Nogales. That's the place that his older brother, Ivan Archibaldo, put him in charge of. So you're going to be in charge of putting drugs to this specific area. Nothing really compared to what Ivan Archibaldo and Jesus Alfredo were putting up into the U.S., right? Like they were putting tons and tons of drugs, while Ovidio had a small operation. Then when they captured El Chapo in 2017, when he was extradited to the U.S., he left everything to Ivan Archibaldo. He was the one in charge, and that broke a war inside the Sinaloa Cartel because El Chapo's godfather, El Compadre del Chapo, uh, who was the head of the prison where he broke for the first time. It was basically El Chapo broke out of this prison, this maximum security prison, with the help of Damaso Lopez, El Licenciado. And in exchange for that loyalty, he made him part of the family of the Guzmans, right? He asked him to be godfather for his sons. He was basically a brother to El Chapo. So when El Chapo was extradited, Damaso Lopez thought that he was going to be the next stop, right? He was the oldest. He proved himself to the cartel. He had a bunch of different, operations already, a lot of men, and he had lost his job as the director of that maximum security prison.
Right.
To go straight to the Guzmans, and he was in charge of Los Chapitos. He was in charge of the kids, right? So I guess he felt that he was going to be the next stop, but El Chapo left everything to Ivan Guzman. So Damaso tried to break a truce or a deal with the Cartel Jalisco, with El Mencho. And they knew that Los Chapitos were, at one point, they knew that Los Chapitos were a fancy restaurant in Jalisco. And that's where they were kidnapped, the three of them, inside a restaurant. Everybody says that it was El Mencho and that it was El Cartel Jalisco. And it's half true, because yes, it was El Cartel Jalisco, but, in a deal with Damaso Lopez, when Los Chapitos learned that Damaso, basically their uncle, was behind that, they started fighting against him. And then he sent a letter to everyone asking for a meeting in the hills of Culiacan to clear his name, because he said that I had nothing to do with that. That was someone else. When everybody arrived there, he went after them. He tried to kill all of them in a massive shootout, surprise shootout he had prepared for them.
So it was an ambush, really.
It was an ambush. And then that, of course, escalated the war against the Damasos and his son. So the Damaso and his son, they both in different times had to leave and to turn themselves over to the U.S. authorities. Otherwise, they were going to be killed.
So in a way, like the Chapitos are dealing with multiple issues, right? Because they're dealing with possibility that the government's going to come in and arrest them. And you would agree that the arrest of Ovidio is pretty much kind of a bluster, probably to impress Joe Biden, probably in a way. And, you know, the president was kind of made look stupid when he released him the first time.
Mhm.
You know, the real, as you kind of talked about, the real people pulling the strings and Chapitos are the older brothers, but they're also dealing with the Damaso stuff. They're dealing with, you know, we haven't even talked about El Mayo Zambada, who, you know, he's a fascinating person because, you know, in when I look at it, you know, if that were someone in the mafia, I mean, they would be a stone cold, you know, we know why they haven't been arrested because they're protected, right?
Yeah,
So the Chapitos are kind of dealing with all these different things.
exactly.
But I think one thing Damaso didn't realize is blood is always thicker than anything else, and he was always going to probably leave it to his kids. What's
Absolutely.
the status of him today, Damaso?
Damaso is still being held in a U.S. Prison, and I think
Probably
he's
best for him.
yes, and I think his son El Minilik Damaso Jr. is about to be released. Really, probably this year.
What do you
Uh,
think will be the goal of him?
I think it's gonna want to stay in the U.S. Absolutely, man. Like they know that they're gonna face their fate if they are turned over to Mexico, especially if they go back to Sinaloa. These guys never forget, as you know, like as the usual mafia. These guys never forget, and if they have enemies, they're gonna wait for the right time to get rid of them. Los
Talk about an
Chapitos,
interesting guest for you there. That'd be
yes,
interesting.
absolutely, man. Yes, yes,
Maybe you can make that happen. That'd be good for you.
will be very interesting. Yes, to
So with you know the arrest, you know, I'll ask you, and then I kind of want to ask you about Mayo, but Ovidio, I mean, the goal is of this country is to extradite him because, as you know, once the U.S. gets involved and brings you here, you're not doing anything. It's
yes.
over for you, and you're gonna go to ADX or wherever it is, and that will be that. Do you think that will happen? And B, at what point does the government get serious? Do they ever actually go after Ivan or any of these folks? Because it seems quite honestly that, you know, it's better off having them around than not having them around.
Yes, I think what is happening right now is that the Mexican and the U.S. government are trying to intimidate and demoralize that faction of the Sinaloa Cartel, the Chapitos faction specifically. They grabbed the oldest, the major one, the El Chapo Guzman. He's extradited. His conditions in prison, we've all read about his conditions in prison where he's not allowed to even have any daytime daylight, sunlight or whatever. He's
But
not
he
allowed.
caused that himself, you
Yes,
know,
yeah,
by
exactly.
escaping and all that stuff.
Exactly. So that's been very demoralizing to the Sinaloa Cartel's Chapitos faction. And now they grab the youngest one, Ovidio. So that really demoralized an organization, right? They feel that they are portrayed as if they don't have enough power. They grab the old one and now the youngest one. So now what's in the middle? Who's going to be next? They've earned themselves a lot of new enemies, starting with Cartel Jalisco Nueva Generación, the CJNJ, the Beltran Leivas what's left for the Beltran Leivas organization, Los Damasos, and they're not in such a great standing with El Mayo and with El Chapo's brother El Guano Guzman. They're not fighting. They're absolutely not fighting. They don't have any beef or turf around them between them. But they're definitely not in great standing because they all want to stay up ahead of the Sinaloa cartel. So I think this is a very smart operation to demoralize a single faction, to make them feel that they're losing power, to make them more violent, and then go again against them when they messed up, when they make a mistake for getting like desperately violent, all that stuff. Now they start an operation to go against El Nini, which is the head of security for Los Chapitos, a young man from Tijuana. He's probably 32, 31 years old. But he's very smart. He has the muscles. He has the firepower. And he's proved himself valuable for the organization. So if they actually manage to grab El Nini, this organization is going to be so demoralized. This organization is going to feel like they don't have any grasp of anything. Right now, how it works with El Mayo specifically is that when El Chapo was still out, El Mayo had an agreement with El Chapo, and both of them were in control of Culiacan, which is basically the cradle of the Sinaloa cartel in Sinaloa. But when El Chapo got out, he left everything for los Chapitos. They became so violent that El Mayo had to retract from Culiacan. And he's a smart man. He doesn't really believe in fighting, violent wars when there's nothing really to win. So what he did is he negotiated Culiacan, and Los Chapitos said, like, well, you're going to have to pay 30% of every operation you want to bring into the city. He said, okay, that's fine. But he went and got a hold of all of the other border cities like San Luis Rio Colorado, Tijuana, Mexicali, Rosarito, all of those border cities. So when Los Chapitos need to use border cities to either bring guns in or drugs out, they're paying the same 30% back to Mayo. So he's a smart man. Like, he's no dumb man.
Well, I want to ask you about him because he probably, I think at this point, is probably one of the most interesting people still in Mexico, right? Because, we hear about the El Menchos and the people like that who probably will never be caught. They're just too big and too powerful. But, Mayo's a guy that he's, in his 70s, right? He's in poor health.
Mm-hmm.
He's not, he's old, right? He doesn't look imposing. But he's protected and he's super powerful. In his entire life, he's never been to prison. And the questions that always come up is how, right? You're this leader, this drug cartel, how and why, and who's actually involved in protecting you?
Yeah.
And does the Mexican government even know they're protecting him? I guess I'll ask you, tell me a little bit about Mayo. And I also want to know, you've talked about in the past an individual, a shadowy figure called, and I don't have his name. You just call him this Cuban guy, right?
Mm-hmm.
And this Cuban guy goes back to the 60s, essentially, in the Fidel Castro group. And this connects to the CIA. And I guess kind of talk about him and some of this kind of thing.
Yeah, definitely. So as you were saying, like, Mayo is a very mythical figure in the Sinaloa Cartel. He was one of the founders. He's probably 80 something years old now, and he's diabetic. So very probably he's gonna die being the head of the Sinaloa Cartel, never facing, the bars. But he's been either very smart or has something that needs to be protected not only by one government, but very probably by two governments, right? Mexico and the US. His beginning, I guess the key is how he started, to get involved in the Sinaloa Cartel or in the drug trade. I'm not sure to say, like, that he's a CIA asset or he works for any, but I asked the question because literally the way he started was through this also shadowy figure that used to be a Cuban police officer under Fidel Castro's revolution. When Fidel Castro stepped up in Cuba after his revolution, he called him, one of the top police officers in that revolution. Then something happened that he left to Nicaragua, apparently already working for one of the agencies, like giving information, doing operations for the CIA. And he had to flee Cuba, stay in Nicaragua for a while when Nicaragua was also facing a lot of issues with the Communist Party and communist groups in Nicaragua. So he did a lot of work also in Nicaragua. And then I'm guessing that through those connections, he got a U.S. Birth certificate, because there is a birth certificate of this man. His name is Antonio Cruz. He's known as Nico. And he got a birth certificate and he moved to Miami. And while in Miami, he started importing a bunch of cocaine from Colombia. And that's where he started that business. Afterwards, he moved to Los Angeles when he basically founded what we know now is the Sinaloa Cartel, because he started managing a bunch of weed from Sinaloa to LA, because he had all the clients, all the permissions, all the money, and the right connection. So he knew how to do the business, even when the Sinaloa Cartel wasn't really aware that they could do. I mean, the Sinaloa Cartel didn't really exist. Even when the Sinaloan traffickers didn't really know that they could do a huge business with weed. They were selling to tourists. They were selling small quantities. exporting some breaks to the U.S., but not in a formal way, in a structured way.
So you're saying this guy from Cuba is kind of
Mhm.
the originator of the Sinaloa Cartel in a way.
Absolutely, yes,
And
yes.
from what work you've done, you essentially uncovered that his wife is actually El Mayo's sister.
Exactly. So
And
he
that's how El
traveled.
Mayo gets connected. Wow.
Exactly. So he traveled to Culiacan after like putting that business on. He met Modesta Zambada, El Mayo's Zambada's older sister. He married her, and then he brought in El Mayo as his kid, as his own son. So he inherited the whole business, the whole connections, the whole clients in the U.S. Probably also his own connections with the CIA.
Sure.
And ever since El Mayo started going up and up the ladder with the help of Nico, then Nico disappears from history. We don't know what happened, where he died, when he died. We know about Modesta Zambada, that she was still around Culiacan and certain other parts of Sinaloa, and then she died. But we don't know anything about Nico. So who really knows who Nico was? Now, his name is really well known in Sinaloa. If you go to very small places where Mayo Zambada it was born and is living as of this day, which is a small place called El Alamo, um, people will react when you say Nico or Antonio Cruz, but they will immediately shush you. Like I recently got an interesting message. I get a lot of threats, right? I get a lot of reaction, threats, everything. And this guy from Sinaloa working for the organization, he kind of like told me just to shut the fuck up talking about the Guzmans and everything. And then when I posted this story on my YouTube channel about Nico, Antonio Cruz, he told me that there's a lot of things that you don't tell, and especially you don't publish. So he's like very, like thinking that you cannot put that name out, even though it's public records. I mean, if you go to certain libraries in Sinaloa or Ciudad Juarez or different
Everyone
places
knows.
where to look for, you'll find his name, a photo of himself, his connection with the CIA, his work in Cuba, but you'll never find where or when did he die. Um, you'll find his relationship with Modesta Zambada and all of that stuff.
So, essentially the US government is very involved with what's going on and actively allowing these individuals to keep doing what they're doing. I mean, do we actually know that El Mayo is actually still alive? I mean, would we actually know when he dies?
I mean,
Because I
for
heard real quick, I heard like Johnny Mitchell, for instance. Like I heard him talking about how, and you probably have discussed this too, like the level of security where like he's like basically on a mountain and there's like so many different people below that you have to get through one group and then to another and then to another. And by the time you get to the top, it's the only way you could really get him would be to like airstrike him, I guess, maybe. Or something.
Yeah, the thing is this, like, if when you go to Jesus Maria, where Ovidio Guzman was captured, it's a small town, 40 kilometers, 40 minutes north of Culiacan, in the footstep of a small hill, and he used to have 19 different security rings, right? The outer and then inner. His inner security ring is or was composed by really young people. You will think that he had, like former special police, whatever,
No,
like
just like kids.
29, 30, 32 years old kids, very well armed and with a bunch of radios, right? Listening to everything was happening around. Um, where Omayo lives currently, it's exactly the same, but south of Culiacan, almost also like 40 minutes south of Culiacan, in the footsteps of a low hill. I was not really close to what they say they lived. I mean, he lived, but I was with this inner circle of security, the guys who take personally care of El Mayo. These guys were actually celebrating the 32nd, the 32th birthday of one of them. So they are around like the 30s, 32, 33 years old. Um, I managed to, they didn't allow me to record anything to, like to have video or photo. But one of the kids was, I guess the youngest one, it was like 27, 28. He had a full belt with different walkies, right? He had like 20 something different walkies that would repeat the same thing over and over until the last one. So one will say, I don't know, let's if you say codes, so they will say like, we have a next one at the 5 door. We have a next one at the 5 door. We have the same. And
The
then
elaborate thing that it
exactly like
creates. Wow.
the X1 moved to the 4th door. The X1 moved to the 4th door. And he was not drinking. He was not using anything. He was nothing. He was just literally quiet because his only job is to be, listening to what's happening in the radios because that's how they're gonna know what's happening. At some point during that night, the main guy, which was a really young guy, really nice people, like they invited us to a cookout and they had a birthday cake. They had his young girl singing narco corrido about El Mayo Zambada and everything. At one point, he shushes all. He's like, shh, quiet. And then he goes and talks to that guy with the radios. And they start saying, so yeah, the Mexican military burned one of our labs, fentanyl labs around the city. So I was like, yeah, but I'll go, right? They're not moving in. And the other guy was like, no, apparently they moved out. They just burned the lab and left. And he's like, whatever, let's see with that tomorrow. And then he turned off his personal radio and just told that guy to be, like,
Just
to
listen.
be, yeah, listening to the radios. And I asked him, like, why do you have a belt full of radios that are basically saying the same thing over and over? And he told me each one of those each one of those radios was a security ring, right? So whenever the security ring number one will hear something, it will communicate everything up to the first security ring where we were. So El Mayo has enough time to leave, but also it's not really hard to get him. Everybody knows where he is, where he's leaving, where he's getting medical attention. Um,
What
Everybody
do
around
we
there. That's the same with Ovidio.
what do we know about like El Mayo? Like, does he like? It's just like a normal existence. Like he has a home and like a wife there, and they just have dinner, and maybe he walks around his property. Like what is his life like? Because really, and I want to ask you this kind of as the overarching question in this whole thing. Like everything you're discussing, it seems like quite a miserable existence, really,
Yes.
as these people, right? You're constantly do you ever actually get to enjoy like El Chapo made billions of dollars, and these guys make so much money, but do they ever actually really get to enjoy their life? It sounds like a miserable existence. What do we know about like what does he do on a daily basis? He sit inside and watch TV all day. It's fascinating that this guy is the guy that runs everything.
Dude, it's so crazy because again, like when they talk about the power that El Chapo had and all the millions and billions of dollars he had, very probably it did, but again, I guess El Chapo was mostly a face or a facade for the real powers behind these so-called
Kind of the front
cartels.
guy. Yeah.
Exactly. And the real guys behind that are attorneys, businessmen, police officers, even US politicians, all those guys. I don't grasp the idea that someone like El Chapo, coming from such an ignorant place, uneducated, from a small place called La Tuna in Sinaloa, will manage these huge enterprise, right? So I'm pretty sure he was the most flashy, the one who wanted to have the reflectors looking at him, and he was serving a purpose for that organization. Now that organization really changed through the years, through the recent years. It went from being a hierarchical organization, very, vertical, to an horizontal organization where you have different leaderships intertwining between them and switching places and then after probably the 2000s the world entered a gig economy, right? Everybody of us are now freelancers for someone. No one is really on a payroll. Everybody's just doing gigs for someone but can do the gig for another company.
Mhm.
And these organizations did the same. They became decentralized and started working on a gig economy. So the suppliers for drug precursors are under the gig economy. They don't really sell only or exclusively to the Sinaloa Cartel or to one man, to El Mayo, if you call it that way. They sell to El Mayo, to El Guano, to Los Salazar, to whichever. They also sell to Cartel Jalisco Nueva Generación and to, like different other factions. Arms traffickers, same stuff. When people are trying to move cocaine lots, let's say that you want to move 10 kilos of cocaine, and I want to move 10 kilos or 5 kilos of heroin, and we'll get to, even if we don't work together on the same organization, whatever. I have a very good plug that, he's really good at moving product from Culiacan to the border.
So everybody kind of works in tandem to make it happen.
Exactly.
They're like what we would, we have here, like a FedEx or UPS or whatever. They all kind of work hand in hand in currying things.
Yes, exactly. So that's basically how that works. Everybody's like putting money together, like investors, to a lot of cocaine or whatever, and then get their money back and never touch the product. So that's literally how this world is working right now. So El Mayo is probably in charge of one of that faction, of one of the major or biggest operations of that brand, because the Sinaloa Cartel became a brand right now. It's a brand that it's actually for hire, right? If you are trying to open shop in Africa, like they're trying to do right now, and the biggest name around the world is the Sinaloa Cartel, you're going to ask permission, you're going to ask to use the brand to move their product, but that's going to be you, Luis Chaparro, in Africa on your own, with your own means. Just
you're like they essentially have franchises.
Franchise, yes,
right.
exactly.
So like McDonald's has these locations that they don't actually own. There's someone that runs it.
Yeah.
They're kind of the figure up top, but they run it to people. So let me ask you, like, how much of the things that we hear in Mexico, how much is it just bluster and it's cool to hear in like the headlines, it's sensational? Like we heard recently in California, there was a cartel hit, and it was not actually a cartel hit. How much of it is just they're all kind of working together, and for the most part, it's pretty quiet, yet there's this media and this press that blow it out and make it sound way worse than it actually is?
That's the thing. Like, it's really hard to go really into the weeds in a news story, right? So you have to be very broad and very general, and I guess that serves a purpose, right? When it's easier to call it the Sinaloa Cartel to everyone is Sinaloa Cartel, than it is to call it a faction or a branch or an affiliated or an associated or an independent man giving services to one faction of the Sinaloa Cartel in specific region, right? It's really difficult to explain all that. That's one of the major things that I'm trying to do when I post videos and stories and a lot of stuff on my Instagram account. I'm trying to sort of, and quote unquote, educate people to make this new version of how this actually works, and that it gets like generalized, so we all understand that there is no single Sinaloa Cartel, no single Cartel Jalisco, and that actually the cartel means something very different than what we think is a cartel.
Yeah.
The cartel is actually the armed branch of an organization. So when you call somebody cartel, what you're really saying is that man is one of those guys with big firepowers, dressed fully camo, like bulletproof
the
vests.
armed people.
Unarmed people. But if you call Ovidio part of the cartel, he's part of the organization. He's one of the head of the organization, but not really part of the Sinaloa Cartel. He's part of the Sinaloa organization.
That's what I wanted to ask you, because I want to ask you two more questions. And one of them had to do with journalism, right? Because, I, for one, in America, am pretty sickened with the level of journalism, whether it's CNN or Fox. It really doesn't matter. They're all the same propaganda machines for whoever they support.
Yeah.
But I think people like you are really important. And I look at, people like, even like a Borderland Beat, people like that, right? That report on independent sources and news. Mexico last year in 2022, they had the deadliest year for journalists ever, right? It's an extremely dangerous profession. How important is the work you do you think? Because as we know, the media in every country is a lot different than it used to be. I guess, how do you make this better? How do you continue doing what you do? What do you ultimately want to get out of this? Like, what's the goal? Is just to continue to educate people and let them know what's going on?
I mean, I honestly very few times think about if what I do is important or has, a major impact or something like that. What I'm trying to do, and I guess we're going back full circle to the beginning. I started this with a bunch of questions, like why all of a sudden the son of the Lord of the Skies was with me at the school, and his dad was seen as a major businessman, and now
Yeah.
he's seen as a criminal. Why? Why did they kill my five friends that same night? What happened?
How did it all get to where it has, right?
Yeah, so I'm in this. I don't know. It's crazy to call it a journey, but I guess I'm on this journey trying to answer questions for my own, for
Yeah.
stuff that I don't know, that I don't get, stuff that I got wrong at the beginning, and that now I'm getting it right. And then 5 years from now, I'm gonna know that I got it wrong again. So I'm trying to get it right again, and things that are
Fascinating.
changing. And so whenever I have the opportunity to go and embed with these people that are actually human beings, and regular people just with different backgrounds, different present, um, I try to put a lot of attention to every detail, like how they speak between each other, how they talk, what kind of words they use. Is that how they, call a shot? Is that how they kill someone? Is that how they order tons of loads to the US? Are they really in charge of this emporium of drugs, or are they just hustling people? Are they actually that wealthy? Or are they, they have money, they live well, but not that well? Are they really hiding, or is that a facade? Are they really working with the Mexican government, or not really, or part of it, or if partial true? And I found that most of my questions are partially answered, because the answer is yes and no at the same time. It's very complicated when you say, like, are cartels working with the Mexican government? It's yes and no at the same time. Yes, sometimes they are when they serve a purpose in certain regions with certain groups, but no, as a general, like they're not working with Mexico's president directly. It's I guess there is a lot to say in between the weeds. Like everything that happens to into the weeds is where you are gonna find more truth to it. But it's gonna take more, way more than an 800 article in a magazine, in CNN, in Vice News, or whatever you want to call it. It's going to take much more than that. It's going to take a full narrative through the years,
Yeah.
to in a full workload. When you say, I don't know, I've read Luis Chaparro for the last 15 years, and I kind of feel that I kind of get it. But I also read these are Ian Grillo's latest three books, and I compare both and kind of get it. So you need to look at these in a full spectrum, which is going to take a lot of time from all of us to just write stories over and over.
Well, how much does misinformation play into that too? Because I saw something recently on, these little like Facebook pages, right? That are essentially the news in these areas, right? Because most people don't trust the news in general. So they have these like independently run like Facebook groups. And I
Mhm.
saw one, I think Vice did it. It was about in Tijuana. They have like these three different groups, and they're just like unidentifiable people that just report on shit. Um, like, what does that play into what you do too? Because they're putting out stuff that might be different, or maybe they have a relationship with someone you don't.
Yeah.
What are they doing?
Right now, that's the biggest weapon against journalists in Mexico. Of course, many of my colleagues have been getting killed in Mexico, and that's also part of the propaganda, right? To stop journalists from going further and to investigate.
Do you think they're the
Um,
cartels themselves or the government, possibly?
I think it's mostly politicians. Whenever you start looking into who was that journalist killed, and go 10 kills before, there's a pattern. Pattern
Hmm.
is they are very impoverished journalists, very vulnerable people that had the support of just themselves, not even their own bosses for the small media companies they work for, hyper local focused, and they were recently working on a political aspect of a story. So that's basically the same pattern from the last probably 20 journalists killed in Mexico, and that's telling a story. Because they are from different states where different organizations are operating. They have worked, different cartels, different names. It doesn't really make sense that, like, it looks like now every single cartel is killing all journalists in every single state, which is crazy. But the one pattern they have is they always go against a governor, a candidate for mayor, a congressman, a politician that wants to give the next step on his criminal career, corruption career.
If they're the real scummy people, essentially.
Exactly. And of
It,
course, and then again, like all the misinformation, there are misinformation that it's like unintentional. When you unintentionally said something because that's what you thought at the beginning, and your source was not right and whatever. But there is dangerous intentional misinformation. Like that's the biggest weapon right now. I was just telling you that. Like right now, what the Mexican government is doing, is that whenever you are an uncomfortable journalist, they will probably not kill you immediately. What they were gonna do is gonna pay other journalists to start versions of you, that you
mm,
abuse the girl, that you are, uh,
smear campaigns.
yes, the smear campaign, until you're left alone without a work, without job, you're desperate, and then you are basically banned from everywhere, and then you're most vulnerable. And then they're gonna send someone to kidnap you and say that either they robbed you, or you was gonna get assaulted, or that you tried to rob someone and a police shot you, or they're just gonna put you in jail. I mean, Quintana Roo, in the very south of the where Cancun sits in Mexico, has like over 5 or 6 different journalists in jail accused of the same thing, that is basically like sexual abuse or something, sexual
It's all
harassment.
just bullshit, and they're just trying to eliminate them.
Exactly. And now it's worse because they face jail, where they're getting raped every day, where they're getting bitten every day, and they don't even know how much time they're gonna spend there. So that's basically the new weapon against journalists. And that's the thing. That's the thing that is worrying for everybody of one of us, because that same weapon works in the US, Mexico, Canada, Europe, right? A smear campaign using your own colleagues can put you down
Yeah.
super easily, right?
Well, it's sickening. And it's, again, it goes back to the whole, it seems like the real scumbags here are the Mexican government. They seem like the real scumbag. And that's, I think, what we've learned everywhere. It's, that you have these crime groups, whether it's the cartels or the mafia or Andrew Tate or someone,
Yes,
like they're
yes.
always painted as the worst people, when in turn it's really the governments that are the worst people. And I don't want to keep you forever. I just have two really like kind of broad questions. You mentioned your life like at the beginning, and you talked about how you seem like you had great parents, and they try to keep you away from that, and you ultimately turned into like this journalism guy, and you now have this career. Another guy that recently has been in the news is La Barbie, right?
Mhm.
This guy Edgar Valdez Villarreal, and he was from a border town, kind of had a similar life in a way, upper
Yeah.
middle class. He had a regular career and a life, and went to school, and then he went into that world.
Mhm.
What do you think the difference is between you and him? Why did you decide like not to go into that world? Like what made you be the opposite of him?
I guess it had to do with your family values, man. I think
Yeah.
probably La Barbie had everything and didn't was not scars at all as myself. That is not gonna make a difference. What's gonna make a difference is what values are transmitted from your family to you. Um, the Barbie, I have the impression that was very much left alone, by his parents. He was making choices on his own.
Did what he
He was
wanted.
trying to figure out his life on his own. And I had the fortune to have my dad and my mom, like to sort of guide me. And even though they also worked a lot and I spent many, many days alone, I had a family at the end of the day to rely on and to, because I also met a bunch of those people and I enjoyed my time when I was probably in high school, uh, you know, going around with people that ended up being part of cartel, ended up as sicarios or drug dealers, as drug traffickers, as the head of regional criminal organizations. And I ended up being a journalist. And I remember that we had great times using like every single drug you could imagine, and partying until probably for 3 days, not coming back home. And I was the one with money, so I was paying for a lot of those drugs, a lot of those rides here and there. I was, my parents used to live in this gated community, beautiful house, 5 different rooms and everything. And I was literally spending my whole day in a slum in Ciudad Juarez, in a very impoverished place where I enjoyed myself and I enjoyed my friends. But then at some point, I thought like I mean, this is not enough. This is cool to party for a couple of days to
This isn't
do.
what I want out of my life.
But
Yeah.
at the end, it's not. I don't feel fulfilled, around these people. I want to pursue a career. I want to become someone. I want to know and learn. I guess I've always been sort of like addicted to learning new stuff. So I learned how to play guitar, and then the drums, and then the harmonica, and then to write and to read a lot. I started building a huge not library, a huge
Like shelf.
yeah, a huge shelf, and reading a lot of poetry and a lot of fiction, and then nonfiction, and then movies. And I had my parents' basement turned into a cinema club. So that put me out of that world, and I think
Just
other
like
now,
culture, really? Like that kind of like different culture. Like
yeah, exactly,
knowing that, just where I am right now is not the only thing that there's a big world out there,
yeah,
right? There's other
and
things. I want to
and
ask you kind of a question relating to that. Nowadays, you have a very busy life. Like you're seeing some really awful things, right? You're dealing with characters that are, as I said earlier, very depraved people. How do you get away from this world? Like, do you have a family? Like, what do you like? How do you just go home and like
yeah,
make dinner and like watch something? Like,
the
how do you program yourself off from that? Because in a way, you kind of have a similar life to the people that you're covering. Like,
yes.
it's I don't want to say it's a miserable existence studying these people, but it kind of is. I mean, in a way, like I know the work that I do. It's like I feel like my whole life involves the mafia and like looking into these people. And it's like they live a miserable life that I don't want for myself or my family. How do you get away from that?
At the very beginning, it was really really difficult because I was I mean, I remember one time in 2015 I was basically stationed in Nogales because I was trying to produce a documentary for Netflix that it's out there.
Hmm.
It's called Dope, and I was
Yeah,
producing the first
I've
episode
seen
in
it. Yeah.
Mexico. So I had to go through a very high on top guy in Sonora. So I stayed there for over a month, and I had to leave in between that world, a hotel, and then he will call me 3 in the morning, and I had to drive in the middle of nowhere for 3 hours to go and meet him, and he will never show up, and I will go back super scared back to my hotel the next night again and again and again for a month until he actually trusted me enough, and then we met, and he granted me full access to all of his warehouses, his men, everything. So it was really good access that I managed to get back then. But when I go back home, I was like super quiet, super, into with my head to wrap around myself. And I was like very jumpy, very nervous, paranoid. I started like drinking a lot and, like going full out when something will happen. I was like, oh, what the fuck's happening? And, and I was like, this is not all right. And this is a consequence of my job. Like I spent too much time alone, too much time driving, traveling in planes, feeling fear, having adrenaline bursts, like, and then nothing happened, and then another adrenaline peak, and then nothing. And that makes you addict to adrenaline. That makes you quiet. It makes you a very, lonely person. And I still feel like that in many ways. I'm still like that. I'm very much a lonely person. I have only a very few friends that I can call my friends, and I don't really talk to anyone about my work. My family and my friends around me, they've learned to not to ask me a lot about my work and everything. So I basically use also therapy. I go to therapy to debrief everything, to
Yeah.
get everything out. And when I feel fear, I recognize the fear in me, and I embrace it, and I like I basically hold it and say like, yeah, it's good to have fear. It's good that I still have fear for my life, and that something's going to happen to me, because that's what's keeping me alive. When I feel that I need to cry, I go and cry, and like to debrief. So I use every single other thing that I can get to debrief myself. So when I get back home, um, a family, I'm a dad again. I'm a husband. I make breakfast every morning. I get my kid ready to school. Um, at the same time, I'm getting messages sometimes from sources. Sometimes they're even threatening me and saying like, dude, or we're gonna go do this and that or whatever. And I just put my phone away and keep getting my kid ready for
You just
school
try
and
to have some balance.
put my mind, because right now I'm with them, and my most important thing is right now to get him ready for school, take him safe to school, and then I can deal with everything afterwards. And then I deal with my shit, with my stuff. If I had to answer the message, if I had to call an authority, if I had to call an NGO for help, if I need to do this and that, I do it until a certain hour in the day, and then again I leave everything at my office and go out and face my family in my regular normal life, and try to not to
So in a
mix
way,
it.
your life will always probably be affected by this, right? I mean,
Yes, absolutely,
that's what it is. I almost
absolutely.
feel myself like I've lucked. I mean, again, I'm not saying the mafia is not around, but
Yeah,
it's not what it once was. I'm sure 20, 30 years ago, I couldn't do what I do talking about this stuff. It wouldn't, and you're kind of living that life now. But I'm glad I don't want to say I'm glad you do, but I'm happy to because the work you do is fascinating and very good. And I have to tell you, before I get to the last question, this is, I've done a lot of interviews. I've interviewed CIA or not CIA, DEA, FBI, judges. I've interviewed mobsters themselves, Sammy Gravano. I mean,
yeah.
this is probably the most interesting interview I've ever done. I think it's fascinating. I appreciate you coming on. Seriously.
Thank you, man.
2024, it's a pivotal year, and I'll tell
Mhm.
you why. In Mexico and here, okay, one of the reasons is, and I'm curious what you think. We've forgotten the name Ociel Cardenas.
Yes.
We've forgotten that name. He's been in prison for about 20 years. He essentially created something that took the cartel from one version to another. He
Yeah.
created this group called Los Zetas, this
Mhm.
paramilitary group full of these very uh, distinctive military men, and he ruled with an iron fist. And then he went away, and they became this awful group of depraved people that hurt people and just put out these awful things.
Yeah.
He's getting out of prison in 2024. I guess my question is two-part. What is the golf cartel? Because golf cartel is kind of almost wouldn't say displaced. They're still around, but we've seen other groups pop up. The Zetas are long gone, but they still have kind of some splinter groups. Golf cartel is still kind of there, though. What is his return to Mexico look like? It's kind of frightening that we're just going to let him out of prison and he's going to go to do what he does. It's not like he's going to go become a chef or something. And
Yeah.
also, Donald Trump has made it clear in this country that he's likely going to run for president again. Now, he's been very outspoken that if he does get in, and let's say he is the elect, I would find it hard to believe he doesn't get elected. Joe Biden is in a bad way right now in this country, very low on the approval rating. Um, he has talked about actively attacking the drug cartels.
Mhm.
Do you ever see a day where like covert missions are happening where Donald Trump is nuts enough to think that he could take them all out? Do you ever think that happens?
I don't think so, man. I know that these guys that end up being presidents in the U.S. or Mexico, they're smart people. They're not uneducated. They are pretty, even
Yeah.
though they seem uneducated and very poor.
Even Trump.
Yes, exactly. Even though they seem very uneducated and very poor in their lectures and everything, I'm pretty sure that they are pretty smart.
Yeah.
And I'm pretty sure that they know the backlash that this could have, right? Going full on, calling them terrorists and going full on against them. And as Tucker Carlson recently asked me on an interview, what will happen if they will just bomb the hell out of the cartels, and all that stuff, which is crazy. But
You think immigration is a problem now? Wait till that happens.
yes,
Because then you're having to take these people in. Because
yeah,
once you put someone as a terrorist organization, you need to accept refugees,
exactly,
right?
exactly. That's the thing. It's gonna backlash, man. Like the
Yeah.
whole campaign that the Texas governor is putting out now, like Greg Abbott against the cartels, calling them terrorists, is backfiring. That's why Texas is getting massive amounts of immigrants, and
Sure.
they could have enough, legitimacy to call themselves refugees if they're fleeing from a terrorist controlled territory, right? And if the U.S. is calling them terrorists,
Right.
then they will have to give asylum to every single one of the Mexican.
That's what I don't understand as to why they do those things. Because again, we understand it's a problem. Like the fentanyl crisis is a problem, and
Mhm.
thousands of hundreds of thousands of people are dying every day on the streets of
Yes.
this country. But it almost seems like you're really kind of defeating the purpose. It's like almost like, why don't you just try to almost help them instead of, like Haiti, for instance.
Yes.
Haiti is an awful place. It is run literally by gangs.
Mm-hmm.
And all these people are leaving and wanting to come to the United States. Why don't we establish some sort of government there to help them?
Mm-hmm.
Or go into Mexico and try to work with some of this stuff and fix it.
But that's the thing. Like, I think I think the best way to help another country is to leave them alone, even if
Yeah,
they're suffering.
it's true.
Because what happened in the Middle East, what happened in Afghanistan, the U.S.
It's always backfired.
quote unquote, they try to help them. They had to go out, and now it's even worse than how it was at the very beginning.
We always
The
have to be
same,
the peacekeepers here, I've noticed,
it's
and it
sad.
never
The same,
works.
the same happened in Haiti, right? They try to go in, and then it's all the same happened in Honduras. They just recently arrested the president for cocaine trafficking, and like so that's been happening over and over. Every time the U.S. also tries to help Mexico with training people, that's how the SETA started, right? Very well.
Alberto Lascano was literally trained by the military in this country. Look at all the guns that come into Mexico. Where do you think they come from?
They come from the U.S. And so every time the U.S. try to, even if they have the best intentions, it's probably not going to have the outcome because we're so close, but at the same time, we're so different. Both countries are so different that something that could work in the U.S., right? In the U.S., if you call a certain group a terrorist organization, you're going to go full on against that terrorist group. And it's going to have probably a positive and expected outcome. But in places like Mexico, that's going to have a totally different outcome because we're facing a very different moment at the time, like where corruption is widespread. We live on corruption, or money, or daily lives is made out of corruption because you skip line to get your payment first. Even if you're doing the right thing, you're still doing it the wrong way because corruption has penetrated every single part of our lives, education, health system, everything. So when you try to, like stop a wound only by applying pressure, that blood is going to come out from somewhere else. And that's what's going to happen in Mexico every time you just. So you need to fix things in the very deeper way, which is fixing corruption. How do you fix corruption? I have no clue. I guess the guy who finds out is gonna earn, the Nobel Prize or whatever, because it's almost impossible to find out how to, unroot corruption from Mexico and countries like these.
Yeah.
But a lot has to do with the fact that we're next to a country that is powerful enough to be responsible for a lot of our political decisions, right? Like what happened with Ovidio. Everybody thought, oh, this is a gift for Biden, right? For President Biden. That's how intertwined we are with the U.S. politics, which, of course, I don't think it's the right thing to do. Like we captured Ovidio. It should be because the Mexican justice system works. But many of, in the reality, probably is not. It's probably just for the Mexican government to have enough leverage or an exchange coin with the U.S. government. Like we have Ovidio, we have Caro Quintero. We know you want him. What are you willing to give back in return?
Right.
It's leverage.
Right.
That's the same, talking again about the propaganda and branding, right? Like the Sinaloa Cartel brand is serving also a political purpose. Because if you want to go against a certain group, a certain family, a certain politician in Spain, in Africa, in Japan, in China, you're going to call them Sinaloa Cartel. You're going to find one man that is importing cocaine and that has a link to a alleged member of Sinaloa Cartel. You're going to call him Sinaloa Cartel is operating here. We need to go and dismantle the Sinaloa Cartel. And then that DEA agent is going to end up being a congressman, a governor somewhere.
Well, didn't they do that with there was a guy years ago, Sai Chi Lop, I believe his name was. He was this, Chinese businessman, right?
Yeah.
And then they find $200 million in cash in a room. And I'm sure someone got elected through that, right?
Exactly.
And we interviewed a guy, Jaime Zapata, who was shot by Los Zetas.
Yes.
And he was literally kicked to the curb. And the people that literally gave him the orders to do what he did and what got him shot, they ultimately became higher up people,
Absolutely.
And then we look at the police and we say, well, wonder why the police are like this. Well, the police are being trained by the people that did their job wrong 40 years ago. And it just all goes downhill. It's a domino effect really at every level. Real quick, as we end this, as you know, southern border at the southernmost point, Tamaulipas, major entry into America. That's a huge border point for the cartels. As I mentioned, Gulf Cartel kind of, doing their thing, but there are these other groups now. What does the release of him mean? Is he now going to become a player again?
I think Ociel is going to be even more surprised to find the state of things as he gets out, right? He's going to find that, of course, Los Zetas doesn't really exist anymore. There is a small group of Zetas in southern Mexico trying to, get back up with the help of a lot of gangsters from El Salvador, trying to put together other groups with the Cartel Jalisco and trying to get more deals with another indigenous group trying to uprise in southern Mexico. That's basically it. Cartel del Golfo, it's still sort of like working on a very regional level, trying to break deals with people in Tijuana, with some other guys in Jalisco, but fighting a million different enemies.
They're kind of splintered too, because there are like all these different groups.
Exactly.
Like Los Rojos and all these different.
Exactly. Yeah. And then you have the Cartel del Noroeste, which is basically dominating all of that border in the east northern part of Mexico. But it's making its money mostly through kidnapping, extortion, and human smuggling. And so it's a very different world than what he left before being extradited to the US, right? So he's going to have, first of all, a lot of enemies, a lot of new bosses, a lot less power. I guess his voice is still going to be heard in Mexico because that's what criminal organizations do. Like with Rafael Caro Quintero, I mean, he was not a player, an active player, but his voice was kind of like respected as an elder. He was like,
oh yeah,
well, he's one of the elders, he's one of the OGs. Let's hear what he has to say, but we don't really have to do what he has to say, And I guess that's what that Ociel is gonna face. He's probably gonna try to go back up, but probably end up with a smaller regional group that still respects him. But for the most part, he's not gonna be who he was, Ociel Cárdenas, right?
He was quite influential, though. I wonder if who else would have had the idea to. It was a fascinating idea to find these like military people to be like your security, right?
Yeah,
it's fascinating to think about. But
crazy,
a wild world you live in, a wild world you cover. Again, very very interesting. This is one of the best I think talks I've ever had. I appreciate you coming on. Before I let you go, I want you to tell everyone where can they find you. I want to let everyone know I linked Luis's YouTube channel in the description. You write for Vice and you do all sorts of things. And I'm gonna ask you, I'm gonna hold you to this. If I ever come to Mexico with the company I work for, which I don't know if they'd even approve it because that'd be wild. I gotta come with you. Can you do that for me? Can we do
anytime, man? Yes, for sure. Let's make a plan and let's.
Could you imagine?
Let's do some interesting stuff around Mexico. We're happy to have you here, man. And again, thank you for having me here, for putting my channel down here. That's what I'm trying to channel all of my stories. I work for many different news organizations. You're gonna find my stories if you just Google my name and then something, Luis Chaparro, and whatever is happening at the current moment in place. But most of my, I guess, strongest, most deep reported stories are going to be on my YouTube channel, which is at Luis Chaparro, but just my name. And yeah, I'm going to try to put up a story every single Sunday. I have a really cool interview coming next week, and then the week after, I have these weed documentary that we just talked about.
That's going to be something I'm
putting out.
It's
going to be interesting to watch. Yeah.
Yeah, looking forward to seeing it. Your last two videos, I went to meet his men in Sinaloa, which just sounds fascinating, embedding with them. And then behind the scenes from inside El Chapo's son's home. And all this stuff just fascinating. And I'm glad you're reporting on it. You're really doing something that very few people are doing. So thank you for coming on. And maybe we'll speak to you again soon. Maybe if you're ever in New York, you come up, we'll meet in the office and have a conversation.
Of course, man.
Really good stuff. Thank you for coming on, Luis.
Thank you very much, man. It was really cool talking to you, man.
Appreciate that. And thanks everybody for listening. As always, go check out Luis's YouTube channel in the description and go subscribe. Check out the stuff. I think you'll like it. Thanks, and we'll see you next week here on the Sit Down.